There's implied mental illness, compounded by financial desperation when it comes to clowns. That's addressed in the Joker film. That aspect of clown life is sort of a theme in the film. The whole story revolves around what made Joker Joker, what caused him to go mad. It's a deep dive into the mind and motive of a sociopath or a psychopath, which is Joker. It's not clear. Um, Joker is a film that has been called a masterpiece by Joe Rogan as well as others, and one of the reasons I decided to see it. It was my opinion that the term masterpiece has been thrown around a little too loosely in our modern culture. I might have been wrong to think that way. It occurred to me while watching this that I was thinking conceptually. You know, what I was witnessing on the screen is that these superheroes and supervillains are archetypes of the same variety that our gods are reflected. The gods and our devotion to them are what inspired civilization that our ancestors have devised in order to create a species that triumphs over nature, or more specifically, our natural environment. Man expresses little desire to triumph over his own destructive nature. Subconsciously, our cultural myth tells us that the world is Gaia, is Lilith, is Sophia, is feminine, it's the mother, Mother Earth, and must be dominated and controlled by man, lest she, the mad stepmother, become the Leviathan, Tiamat, and wreak chaos into the world. That subconscious archetype of the past is why we have the patriarchy that exists and is being challenged today. It's at the root of this culture war. You know, so don't be too quick to dismiss archetypes because they inform the society that we exist in. They're literally a dynamic or an operating system that informs who we are as a species through culture. Young and Campbell both understood that profoundly, and even Jordan Peterson does to some degree, respectable degree. So who are the trickster clown gods of our past? Every religion has at least one. Some have multiple jokers. You might immediately think of Loki. You might possibly think of Kokopelli if you live in the Southwest. You might think of Hermes or any of his variations. Eris, goddess of chaos. Laverna, the Roman version of that. You might think of Shiva even as a jokester, or even Dionysus, because they embody specific traits of the Joker. The Joker is a dancer. He has music within him. Okay, he's guided and controlled by muses. You might even think of Kek. If you've watched my previous video on America, Out of Order, the cult of Kek and chaos magic, even in monotheistic religions like Judaism, there's tricksters. Think of all the trickery that went on in the Torah. Jacob and Esau, the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve, were full on trying to screw each other over by trickery. Our favorite sons screwing the firstborn out of their inheritance, the birthright, with the help of their cunning and duplicitous mothers, women, often. It's almost what the Bible tells us is the foundation or crux of human behavior, because words are what we use to deceive, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God in the beginning, right? We know that that's a lie. God is a lie. Jesus' most egregious crime against the authority of his time was to not be funny. They killed him because he wasn't funny. And Jesus was the light and the truth and the way, but he was no fan of the liars, you know. You remember the Gospel of John, when Jesus calls the Pharisees the sons and daughters of the devil, born of a liar and murderer from the beginning. You can't say that shit to someone in power without that nervous little just kidding. You know, if you don't make them laugh, they'll kill you. We all know the court jester is the only one allowed to speak truth to power through the medium of satire. To speak the truth to power without valid fear of reprisal, one must denigrate oneself to the lowest position in the social dominance hierarchy to such an extent that any real criticism will be dismissed as entertainment and buffoonery. Even though we all know the truth in what the Joker says. The Joker is the wild card because the Joker theoretically has the power, if not the authority, to shape cultural norms by exposing hypocrisy. Even when a clown tells the truth about something substantial, the source is taken into consideration and generally dismissed. George Carlin, the truth he spoke that was dismissed as unbelievable. Bill Hicks as well. And I hesitate to even call either of those guys a comedian. They just told the truth that was so awkward and uncomfortable the laughter came about as a byproduct. And that's exactly the source of Joker's inappropriate laughter. His laughter is phony. It's a coping mechanism. It's an involuntary reaction to threat. He exists in a state of constant fear because his life is the epitome of chaos. He's incapable of getting a grip on reality because he's naive, and he's naive because he's innocent. He remains innocent in his own mind because he rationalizes his psychotic behavior. Everything's justified to him. Everything he does has a cause, a reason. There's a reason to his madness. He's the quintessential fool. He has ambitions to avoid the trappings of the rat race by becoming a comedian. That escape route is what allows him to barter his childhood for his future against his mother's best advice. The comedian and the musician have historically held the social role of the shaman, wise men, healers, leaders in tribal societies. The fool is the wise man. When you see the absurdity of the reality that we exist within, maniacal laughter is a natural response. But if you're human at some point, you will find yourself weeping, sobbing hysterically, and that hysterical sobbing will transmorph into maniacal laughter. The same thing happens in reverse. In the Joker film, both types of episodes are reflected. Grief becomes laughter in the train, and laughter becomes grief at his workplace. Joker is criminally insane. Is he? Or is he reacting appropriately to a world that's lost its mind? I imagine that's why the authorities sent out warnings and disclaimers about this film. It may inspire homicidal behavior in the mentally unstable. That's their concern, and for good reason. They know that type of emotional propaganda works. They know it works because they use it to recruit young people into the military. They use the same kind of Manson-esque mind control to maintain order that cult leaders use to subvert authority and the order of the authoritarianism establishes. They don't dismiss it because they know too well how it works. They use it to get young men to kill people on behalf of their financial interests. And that's it. It's effectually chaos magic. Okay? So is this film dangerous? Could this film inspire ideation that could be detrimental to the order of society? I suppose. Batman films have a history of inspiring violent lunatics to mass murder. It happened once in Aurora, Colorado. We fret over it. That's how terrorism works. That's also how psyops work. Is it more dangerous than what our bozo in chief tweets on a regular, though? No. No, and here's why. Simple people think he's telling the truth and is genuinely concerned with the state of our country when he spews his vitriol on Twitter or on television. They don't think he's a clown. They take this idiot seriously. That's far more deadly than any message coming out of this comic book movie adaptation of the Joker's origin story. There is an actual Joker in the White House. They think Clown World is a phenomenon that's coming from the overreaction and the exaggeration of grievances from the left. No ideology holds a monopoly on Clown World. Okay? Right-wingers are calling Joker a Hollywood love letter to Antifa. I love that. Okay? I do. I love it. Why? Because they think Jews are secretly behind Antifa as a movement. It's like, no shit. Fascists rounded up 6 million Jews and put them in ovens. It's shocking to anybody that Jews aren't real big fans of nationalism. Jews spent the majority of their history without a nation. You're somehow surprised they aren't real big on nationalism, except for Zionists. And not all Jews are Zionists. In fact, most Jews aren't Zionists. And we should all be Antifa. If we were all Antifa, then Antifa wouldn't have to take the brunt of the blame and criticism for resisting fascism. I've made a video about that. Watch it, okay? Really, though, because when the right think nobody's listening, they're secretly blaming everything wrong in the world on the Jews. They believe everything that comes out of Hollywood is Jewish globalist propaganda. That Jews are evil and hell-bent on enslaving the world, except for the part where they're required to usher in Jesus' second coming and the eschaton per prophecy. Okay, so the evangelical Christian in America considers the Jew a necessary evil. And that's what I signed up for when I decided to go check out Joker. I wanted to see it for myself. Is this leftist propaganda? Not any more than history books, the news, and reality are. Which is suspect, right? Depending on where you're getting your history and your news and what you use to inform your reality. Reality isn't a communist conspiracy, though. We aren't talking about fake news and alternative facts here. The fact that the French and Russian revolutions happened is left propaganda to some of these idiots on cable news and on YouTube and in the right wing. The reason they happen aren't discussed, just that people were starving and the poor stole from and murdered the rich. That's the line. That's the lie that's spun on the right. Well, one of them. Did Hollywood turn the Joker into a hero of the left? If I'm honest, yeah, I can admit that, maybe a little bit. Arthur Fleck becomes the Joker because of what capitalism did to him and is doing to us. He doesn't have access to mental health care like the right wing don't want us to have. He's poor, meaning he doesn't have access to the fruits of his own labor like the right don't want us to have. He's punished for being the victim of his own circumstances, while his nemesis is the epitome of privilege. He's forced to repay back what was stolen from him. That prop sign. The hero that isn't martyred will invariably live long enough to become the villain in his own story. Shouldn't the opposite be true as well? The villain that lives long enough will see the error of his ways and the reality of his narrative without attachment to his ego and thereby be redeemed. What's that Zizek cliche that he despises so much?
What's the problem? The problem is, let's take this noble motto, an enemy is someone whose story you have not heard, and do something very vulgar, in the sense of British empiricism. Let's just replace the general name with a concrete example. Would you also say Hitler was our enemy because we did not really try to hear his story?
The villain is just someone whose story you haven't heard yet. That's the bottom line for this film. That's his story. Every step toward his psychological unraveling, documented on the silver screen in as realistic way as possible. You leave the theater thinking that the plot isn't all as far-fetched as one might think by reading comic books as a young man or young person now, because comic books are no longer written or marketed for young white males exclusively. And right-wingers are stomping their feet over it. And that's a legit grievance for these fucks, really. Being inclusive of Jews and atheists during the holidays is a frontal assault on Christians. That's the way they see it. Life has become too easy for us. Some of us, anyway. We have nothing substantial to complain about or orient our passion against, so we manufacture enemies and exaggerate our victimhood. The right do it as much or more so than the left do, and the people that the left casts as victims actually have a legitimate case. That's the main difference. People are going to say I'm an asshole for saying that. I don't care. Sorry, I'm just not sorry. I'm a recovering asshole. But I still have a little bit of my nature left in me. I'm not loyal to a brand or ideology. I'm going to tell my truth from my own conscience, to my best knowledge. And you can have Barabbas, okay? People online complain about assholes laughing inappropriately during this film. I admit it. I was that asshole. I found myself laughing my ass off at some pretty disturbing shit. No spoilers, but you know Joker doesn't off himself in this film because obviously he lives to become the bane of Bruce Wayne's existence. No offense to Bane. But while we're on the subject, Bane delivered a pretty leftist monologue in the Coliseum in The Dark Knight Returns, or The Dark Knight Rises.
And do you accept the resignation of all of these liars, of all the corrupt? The corrupt! The oppressors of generations who have kept you down with myths of opportunity, and we give it back to you, the people.
Joker delivers no such motivational speech. When Joker finally has the platform to address the world, he rambles incoherently.
You're awful.
Me? I'm awful? Oh yeah, how am I awful?
Playing my video, inviting me on the show. You just wanted to make fun of me. You're just like the rest of them.
You don't know the first thing about me, pal. Look what happened because of what you did, what it led to. There were riots out there. 2 policemen are in critical condition. You're laughing. You're laughing. Someone was killed today because of what you did.
I know. How about another joke, Murray?
No, I think we've had enough of your jokes.
What do you get
I don't think so.
when you cross
I
a
think we're
mentally
done
ill
with your
loner
jokes.
with a
That's it.
society that abandons him and treats him like trash?
Call the police,
I'll
Chief.
tell you what you
Call
get.
the police.
Get what you fucking deserve.
He doesn't say anything that could be considered particularly inspiring or profound. He doesn't come off as an evil genius or someone that could be seen as a movement organizer. His motives weren't political, but rather personal, and you wouldn't know where he stands politically by anything that he does or says. He exhibits no contempt for the rich or the powerful. He doesn't examine the roots of his suffering beyond to see his own suffering as a tragedy and then as a comedy in a single lifetime. Something snapped in him, and he stopped taking life and death so seriously. He became the dramedy masks. He ends his tirade in a joke. What do you get when you treat a mentally deranged person like trash? You get what you fucking deserve. Joker's multidimensional. Batman is a paper cutout. Batman's one-dimensional, and he takes himself very seriously. Batman is the actual villain here. Like Yahweh, we are indoctrinated into viewing him as the hero or the good guy. We call him the Caped Crusader or the Dark Knight. Do you know who the Knights Templar are? Or the Knights of Malta? Do you know what the Crusades actually were? Whether or not any of those people are good is very subjective, okay? But kids, they've grown up watching these Batman films. They know the Batman is the real bad man. Bruce Wayne, Christian Bale, was literally American Psycho, for fuck's sakes. Heath Ledger's Joker is core to internet memery. The kids love his Joker. The hypocrisy that Heath Ledger's depiction of Joker exposed is the stuff kids mock adults with. They love it. That wasn't always the case, though. Batman was always the hero, right? You have a rich vigilante that operates outside the law to protect Gotham from deranged lunatic. The coward that hides his true identity. Really? Really? What does Joker say about himself? That he's the Lord of Chaos or something like that. That would be Saturn. His life was chaos. He mastered his life by embracing his death. He is now Lord of Chaos. No. He's still the slave of chaos. What are these archetypes referencing? You know the ancient Aztecs invented Batman, right? Batman is the archetypal vampire, bloodsucker, Ouroboros, Leviathan. He's the Dark Knight. He's not the sun, okay? Vampires are always the elite class. They're the noble class, the land baron class, the ruling class. Batman is just one more example of the establishment telling you who your heroes should be. Bruce Wayne is an asshole. He's boring and he takes himself too seriously. He's a full-blown egotist. He's not fighting crime either. He enables it. If you watch Batman, Christopher Nolan's rendition of it, Joker took down the mafia, not Batman. They falsely equate poverty with crime. It's an obvious wrong assumption. Unless you've lived among these people, you might not understand their moral and ethical codes. The crime is perceived projection. You know who are the most likely to become criminals in reality? Stanley Kubrick. Alex in A Clockwork Orange. That's the recipe for a psychopath killer, criminal. Affluent and entitled teenagers and the children that come from broken homes, obviously. That's who really is committing crime. And that's why crime rates are down. There aren't that many affluent entitled teenagers anymore because there's ostensibly no working class, and because unwanted fetuses are being aborted before they have a chance to become unwanted children and thereby unwanted adults, we don't have them represented as often in society in the form of criminals. This is historically accurate in the film. In the late 70s and 80s, crime in urban areas was atrocious. What happened to make crime rates fall? Two things. One is broken window policing, and the other was Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade made unwanted children less of a societal problem. Broken window policing made crime rates decline, but illegitimate incarceration a pandemic that the right refused to address. The left don't really address it either. In fact, the left are even partially responsible for it. The crime laws that Bill Clinton passed in the 90s are the reason why we have so many people in prison for no good reason. So, naive people believe that bullshit and make Batman out to be a hero in the minds of their gullible children.
Don't drink that!
We know what motivates Bruce Wayne. He's not actually interested in protecting the citizens of Gotham from gangs of criminal thugs. He's working to protect the aristocracy from the clown-faced, pitchfork-wielding proletariats. Really, he's a psychopath with a trust fund and a lust for violence. He doesn't care about innocent victims of crime. He doesn't give a shit about children. And he doesn't give a shit about the people of Gotham. What is he doing to stop kids from growing up in the absence of their parents? He's perpetuating the status quo that causes social economic collapse in the first place. Just because your parents are dead doesn't mean they're around to raise you and guide you and instill values into you, especially if they're working 3 jobs or incarcerated for doing what's necessary to put a roof over your head and food in your belly, like selling drugs. That's what good people do to get by. Rather than rob, extort, human traffic, burglarize, commit crimes that actually have human victims, what do good people do? They sell drugs. That's what makes this film dangerous, because we don't have to stretch our imaginations to envision a world full of young and angry mobs of disaffected people dressing up in Guy Fawkes masks and lighting shit on fire. We don't have to imagine a government or political system that could be so corrupted that it might inspire psychopathy in the public to that extent. Other countries don't know what the term going postal means. In a healthy society, the television series Breaking Bad couldn't exist because school teachers would never have to resort to making and selling crack to pay medical bills. If the Breaking Bad dad were an unemployed black man, that show wouldn't be seen the same way by white America. And that's why the Joker can't be anything other than who he is. It wouldn't work otherwise. That doesn't even occur to most people. America is divided up neatly into 2 groups to blame each other for the failures of their government and their governing system that both sides are culpable for, and collude with each other to undermine the informed will of the people. Informed being key, because neither side actually has a clue to the reality of the situation. Their narrative makes sense to them, and they don't question it, so the solution seems cut and dry. It's the Republicans' fault. It's the Democrats' fault. Americans are fans of political parties. We engage with it like it's just entertainment. It's theater, but the reality is that it actually affects people's lives, and people die depending on a popularity contest to decide who gets to make the rules. We may as well anoint the winning quarterback of the Super Bowl president. I don't think the left would go for that, but the right would. All the actors that have been elected into political seats have been Republicans except Al Franklin, and the left Me Too'd him. The left actually do hold their representatives accountable when they do unethical things. Party loyalty over what's best for the United States as a whole is the problem. We no longer consider each other Americans. Not if we root for opposing political parties, we don't. We're fanatical about our parties, loyal to them above our own principles and sensibilities. Now that we know the truth about Batman and the Joker and their motivations, we have to really come to terms and reconcile with the with the fact that Batman has been used as a propaganda tool. And now that we know that the Joker is human and relatable, I imagine there are going to be a lot more Joker fans, presumably on the left side of the political paradigm. And there can be no reconciliation because the truth's never known. Or even worse, the truth's not believed. It's willfully denied. America would rather have Barabbas than Jesus, so don't tell me we're a Christian nation. Well, that's a fantasy. This isn't Star Wars. But we do see it in Star Wars, though. Anakin's good, right? He's corrupted and becomes evil. He becomes Darth Vader, who's the stand-in for the Dark Father. We know from the ancients as Saturn, the judgmental father. Time, Kronos, whatever. Then he's eventually redeemed by a son, Luke Skywalker, who is the son. Dude, that's not the way the myth happens, okay? Peterson tells you that. He's wrong. You don't save your father from the underworld by slaying the dragon, okay? You kill your father and you rape your mother. He doesn't want to tell you that for obvious reasons. You don't want to hear that, and he wants you to subscribe to his Patreon, so he tells you some bullshit that makes you feel good. But really, when you talk about Jung in the actual shadow, that's the kind of shit you're dealing with. You're looking at rape and murder as a human behavior, and the psychology that motivates that shit. And until you actually honestly look at that, you're not going to understand it. So if you're listening to fucking Peterson talking about saving your daddy from the dragon in the underworld and resisting the authoritarian, the totalitarian tyranny of the wicked stepmother and the chaotic evil Tiamat Leviathan, you're not really looking at your shadow. You need to look at your shadow. You need to understand it. And stop listening to Peterson. He's an idiot. Okay? That's the real allegory. It's all allegory, all metaphorical to our human experience. It's fascinating, and it should be. It points to some societal problems. Fundamentally, a society predicated on the subjugation of any type of human cannot evolve. You can't just kill all the men and bang all the women forever. Not even Genghis Khan got away with that indefinitely. But he sure did give it hell, okay? And that's life. That's life. Now, if you think that that's wrong, and you should, because it is, then you need to address that. And war is the breeding ground for that kind of fucking behavior. That shadow shit that Jung talks about, that Peterson pretends to talk about. Rape and murder is war. And the God that we worship, generally speaking, in civilized, quote-unquote, societies, they all worship that God. So you can't really have that both ways. There was a time and a place for it. That time is changing, and the devotees of that war God are gonna fight like hell to keep it the way it was. Conserve that. It's not worth conserving. It's time to let that shit go. And that's life. Tragedy plus time is comedy. That's the underlying motif of Joker. Joker knows what time it is. He's on borrowed time because he's really got a death wish going on. He's made an ally of death, so now he's fearless. He can tell the truth because he's not just willing to die, but accepting, even embracing it. He romanticizes his own death at this point. So he's mastered his life. He's not taking himself seriously, and that came hard. But he's prepared because he spent much of his life unsure if he ever even actually existed in the first place. Nobody paid attention to him. He measures his existential value externally. That was a mistake. So he had a Descartes epiphany. I think, therefore I am. It's more like I suffer, therefore I am, which is a Buddhist principle, okay? Enlightenment is madness. So if you ever find yourself in a state of enlightenment, you might just want to keep that on the down low because they might lock you up. An enlightened species isn't good for a slave race. Slavery doesn't tend to work well when the masses know who and what they are and are no longer motivated, or rather manipulated, by fear or desire.